Good afternoon, everybody. It's 12 o'clock, and we are about to start our third session of our virtual series. We hope everybody has enjoyed their time spending with us, either at their lunch hour or in the evening, learning a little bit more about the rules. We appreciate your participation, and for those that have been on with us for all 3 weeks, you made it, and we're excited to have had you. And for those that may be their first time, welcome. And we hope that you find this session very informative, and you come join us for one of our future sessions, which stay tuned to your email. We will be having full day sessions being promoted here very shortly at a few areas of the state. And we hope that if you found this helpful, we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of these rules during that session. We hope that that you will join us then. But for today's session, we are going to be focusing on 4 rules. So finding and identifying the ball, Rule 7, playing the course as you find it in Rule 8, and playing the ball as it lies in Rule 9, and then ball in motion deflected in Rule 11. These are pretty heavy rules. A couple of them we hope that you don't have to use in Rule 7 and 11. There's 2 in the middle there that you use all the time, whether you know it or not, in Rule 8 and Rule 9. We're happy to take your questions here live on the presentation. Amanda Kelly will be handling those questions, and we will keep those at a pretty high level. But all of your questions will be answered one way or the other, either online or direct follow-up via email, or if you hang out at the end from Amanda or myself. But let's go ahead and jump into Rule 7, which is finding and identifying the ball. So the player is responsible for finding their ball in play. You'll see there's a few different ways that can happen, but ultimately it is up to the player themselves as to making sure that ball is theirs and playing it. Because if you don't, then that responsibility is yours, and you may get penalized for playing a wrong ball if it is not your ball. But you are entitled to several different ways in achieving that task of finding a ball if you happen to be in a case where you need to search for it. So there's a couple of different phrases and words that are going to be used throughout this presentation. You know, what is fair and what is reasonable. We'll see those frequently throughout the presentation. And to summarize it, it's, to put it in layman's terms, it's, you know, what makes the most sense. You know, could there have been another way that is less intrusive? You know, could you have done it any other way to not, you know, move more things out of the way or break something? Was there a better way to do it? And more times than not, this will be very obvious as to what's reasonable and what's not, what's fair and what's not. Ultimately, it could come down to a judgment call if you're playing in a tournament. That rules official or committee member, head golf professional, whoever the case may be in charge of that committee, will just have to make that call if there is a gray area of having to really find out what actually happened and make that call. But essentially, what is fair and what's reasonable can be very obvious as to what that player can and cannot do. So if you are searching for your ball, you are allowed to move sand and water. I've never heard of anybody moving water to find their ball, but it's there in case you do need it. You're allowed to move or bend natural things and other objects. We've covered in other rules prior to this presentation. You can also break those things, but again, only if those objects are broken as to what may be considered reasonable to find or identify the golf ball. One thing I will point out on this slide is that if you do have to move sand to find a ball, so you have a ball buried in a bunker, you're entitled to move that sand to find it. If you do find the ball, even if the ball moves, there's no penalty, but you do have to recreate that lie in that sand. If you don't, then you would incur a general penalty. But if you do recreate that lie, if it was completely buried by sand, you are allowed to leave a small amount visible in order to make that stroke. So that's one thing I do want to point out there involving a ball in sand. Next, just to highlight, you know, the moving, bending, breaking of things, we see a long defined term, or actually 2 of them, and what is to improve and conditions affecting the stroke. We're going to talk more about that in Rule 8 up next. But if you do happen to improve one of these conditions affecting the stroke, just kind of put that in your back pocket for now, and we'll cover that on the next section. If the improvement results from what is reasonable or fair, there is no penalty for that. Even if there was a slight improvement, if it was in a fair or reasonable search, there's no problem. However, if you do cross that line and it becomes something extra to where it was not considered reasonable or fair, then you do get the general penalty under 8.1, which again, we'll cover on the next section, on the next rule. But keep in mind, if it's fair and reasonable, no problem. Even if there was slight improvement, the rule 7 kind of overrides Rule 8 in this case, to where the rules do want you to be able to find the ball, even if certain things happen. You kind of, quote, get lucky to improve slightly. The rules are going to allow you to find that ball. That way it's not a lost ball, and there's more penalties coming thereafter. So now you found the ball and you need to identify it. So I mentioned the 3 ways that the rules say. It could be by obviously yourself finding that ball, seeing your identifying mark on the ball. That's why the rules say you should put an identifying mark on the ball. That's not a must, that's a should. If you see the word must, that means that's an instruction. And more times than not, there's going to be a penalty if not carried out. You see the word should, that's something I would say a strong encouragement. It might save you from receiving a penalty down the line. But you should put that identifying mark on the ball if it's found by someone else. So the example in the rule book is, you have a spectator up ahead, or someone sees a ball land in a tree or in a branch to where you can see a ball up there. The spectator says, yes, I saw that ball land right in that spot. That is your ball. Then you can use that information gathered by the spectator and use that to determine if it's your ball or not. And that's acceptable. And then the third bullet point, even if you don't have an identifying mark on the ball, if you know you're playing a Titleist 2 and you have an idea of the condition of the ball, there's no other ball in the area, then that is fine too. But if you get down to the last part of this slide, if you do find an identical ball, so I'm playing a Titleist 2 with no identifying mark, there's another Titleist 2 in the same area. Now, I don't know if which ball is mine and which one is someone else's. So now we have a lost ball situation. Even though we know one of them is mine, we can't determine which one exactly is. So now I have to go backstroke and distance. So that's why that could have saved me in that case, because if my Titleist 2 had my blue circle on it, which I use to identify my ball, then I would have saved myself a stroke and distance penalty. In the rare case that I use a blue circle and another player uses that same blue circle, and we can't identify which ball is ours, then unfortunately, that's another case where it is stroke and distance, but those are very few and far between. So it is important to have a kind of unique identifying mark. That way, there's no confusion there. Next, if you have to lift the ball to identify it, that is perfectly acceptable within the rules. There is a procedure which has to be followed. That's a must. So you find a ball in any area and you need to lift it to identify it. The ball must first be marked, and also you cannot clean it more than needed to identify it. There's a few cases where in the rules where you can have a ball in your hand and you're not allowed to clean it. This is one of them under Rule 7. The other 3, so there's 4 total. It is to see if it's cut or cracked. So if the ball needs to be substituted because it's damaged, that's another case where it cannot be cleaned and the ball's in your hand because it's interfering with play. So if someone asks you to move the ball out of their way, you cannot clean it in that case. And to see if it lies in a condition where relief is allowed. So you're trying to determine if another rule would apply. You're not allowed to clean the ball unless, let's say, that you do find that your ball is in ground under repair. That rule says you are allowed to clean it, but until you know for a fact that another rule applies, in which case you are allowed to clean that ball, those are the 4 times that it cannot be cleaned. Now, in this slide, there's 3 bullet points here. This is part of our procedure. So player finds a ball, needs to identify it. They forget to mark it. They lift the ball when they don't need to identify it, so it's very obvious it's their ball. and I see my blue circle on it for some reason, I pick it up. Or I do everything I need to identify it. I mark the ball, I lift it up, and then I clean the entire golf ball, all the mud off of it. Those are all three cases in which I'm going to receive a one-stroke penalty for not following that procedure in the correct way. So once you mess up one of these, go ahead and mess up all of them, because it's all one penalty stroke. You're not going to get three separate one-stroke penalties for this procedure. So let's say you forget to mark the ball, you pick it up. Now you know you've got a one-stroke penalty. You might as well go clean it, because it's all part of that same procedure. We're still in that same situation. It's not going to be cumulative penalties here. So let's say we find we're in an area where we need to find our ball, and the ball is accidentally moved during search. This was a nice change a few years ago. There used to be a penalty involved here, but now there's not. So if we are in the process of searching for our ball, whether it be our own ball, it could be an opponent's ball or someone else's ball, as long as we're in the middle of that search and haven't found the ball yet, if it's accidentally moved, there's no penalty in that case. So I've highlighted the word while on this slide because that is one of our kind of hidden definitions. We have lots of defined terms in the rules, which I know that Amanda and Kent have hit on the last 2 weeks and the importance of, but there's also these hidden or internal definitions. So when we say while, that means that there is a beginning and an end as far as when we are involved in a search. So if we are, the example they give in the book, if we hit our ball into a wooded area and we're walking up to that area that we think our ball landed in, but we don't know that our ball hit a tree and came back into the rough, so we are not actively searching. We're just casually walking up to an area that we think. We're not in that period of while searching. So if we do happen to step on the ball just out of coincidence, that would be a case where we would still be penalized because that is not while searching. And the other, on the end part of it, we are searching for a ball. We've found a ball. Now we need to take that process to identify it. Once we've identified it, it's no longer in the quote while period. So now other rules would apply that we'll get to in Rule 9 as far as if we do move our ball and what to do depending on who moved it and so on. But in any case, the ball must be replaced on its original spot and then move forward with that next stroke. Amanda, do we have any questions on Rule 7 so far?
Nope, no questions yet.
Perfect. All right, so now we're going to go to Rule 8. This is a rule that if you know it or not, you use for every single stroke that you make because there are implications for what you can and cannot do for that next stroke. And we'll start with a big defined term, which is our conditions affecting the stroke, or CATs. I'll shorten it from here on out. So our CATs are 5 things, and each of these italicized and underlined also have their own definition. So conditions affecting the stroke, that's a defined term. Each of these 5 also have their own defined term. So the lie of the player's ball at rest, we see that picture down bottom left, pretty self-explanatory. The area of intended stance, so that highlighted area in yellow, so it includes our feet, obviously, but it also includes our body position in that stance. So it includes where we are going to position our body. So it's obviously our feet, but it does go upwards to include our body. And then next, our area of intended swing. We've highlighted that in yellow because it includes the backswing and also the follow through, and that the entire circle of where our club may be during that stroke. Next, the line of play. We have that highlighted because it's not just a direct line. It's where we want the ball to go. It also includes an area on either side to include where the ball might go, because we all know that we're not perfect, and even though we want the ball to go a certain place, there is a area for margin of error there, and it also goes upwards too. And then the 5th one is our relief area. Relief areas were included in the revision of the rules in 2019, so it includes an area that is called the relief area that we will drop or maybe place a ball when the rules do require or allow us to do so. So next, another definition that we need to highlight is what it means to improve. So this is another one that when you see the definition in Webster's dictionary versus the rules of golf, there's some slight difference there. So we need to do something to the conditions affecting the stroke or other physical conditions, which we'll see in 8.2, which means, we got our cats. The cats only apply to our next stroke. So when you have the ball in play or not, even in the teeing area, we have our conditions affecting the stroke. That's for that very that exact situation. But the other physical conditions, meaning where our ball might come to rest. So we have a ball that is close to a bunker. It's in a tough lie. We might, not hit the best shot in the world. It might go in the bunker. So if you go over and rake those footprints, those would be an example of other physical conditions that you cannot improve in Rule 8.2. The other part of it is gaining a potential advantage. So when you improve an area, the Webster's version would say, okay, you've improved it, penalty, automatic. The next part of that in the rules of golf is you have to gain a potential advantage for that next stroke. So if you are taking notes, if you want to write down, there's a couple clarifications, 8.1a/1 and 8.1a/2 that are going to give examples of what it means to create a potential advantage and not. So the example that I always like to give, so I've got a divot in front of my ball that lies 250 yards away from the hole. I'm using a 3-wood, I'm a decent golfer. I'm going to take a full swing in a 3-wood. I go replace the divot that's 5 yards in front of my ball. Well, in that case, I have not gained a potential advantage because one way or the other, my ball is going to go well past that divot, and whether or not I improve that divot has no impact on that next shot. So I did not gain a potential advantage for that next shot. But now, so I've hit a decent shot with my 3-wood. It lies just in front of the green. I've got another divot in front of my ball, which now I'm going to actually putt that ball, and I replace the divot. So this situation changes dramatically because now if I'm putting the ball and it's going to go potentially through that divot, that is a huge potential advantage by replacing that ball. So we've got two exact same situations in that we've got a ball in the fairway, a divot just in front, but because of kind of expanding that stroke, what it is going to follow. One case we've gained a potential advantage, and the next one we have not. So there is more info that needs to be gathered when looking at this. So here's our allowed actions, and I put reasonable in quotation because most or all of these include what would be considered reasonable. So fairly searching for your ball, we covered that in Rule 7. Removing movable objects, we've already covered that and what's reasonable in removing a loose impediment or a movable obstruction. What's reasonable to mark, lift, and replace the ball. Grounding your club lightly as part of the game. If you do ground your club lightly, which means to just that the ground or the grass just supports the weight of the club, you're not pressing anything down too heavily, that is obviously reasonable. To firmly place your feet to take a stance, again, all within reason. So this player in the bottom right in this tree, so you can tell that he's done a pretty good job of getting in there, taking a stance, and all within reason. He could have very easily used his arms, his body, his feet to move those branches out of the way, but he didn't. So that is very reasonable. And if he exceeded that, then we would get into, we've got an improvement. It wasn't within reason, and now we may have a potential penalty if there was a better way to do it. Fairly taking a stance, that is something that, again, involves some subjectivity, and more times than not, it's going to be very obvious. Did you, use your leg to move a branch out of the way, use your elbow or body to do so? But in rare cases, we have to get involved and make those rulings. Next, again, in our allowed actions, when making a stroke, so it includes the backswing. So I've got a ball in a tree. I know I can't break branches to improve that area ahead of time, but if I make a backswing and I improve that area by breaking several branches off and I complete that swing, that the rules are going to say that's fine. Now, if I take a backswing and I break all the branches and I discontinue, so I haven't actually made the stroke, now I have improved, or may have improved, and I'm going to get a penalty potentially for doing that. So it's actually making the stroke and doesn't include any practice strokes or anything like that. So just be very careful that if you are in that situation, that if you are going to think you're going to break stuff on your backswing, go ahead and complete that stroke, because there could be a penalty involved. Making improvements in the teeing area. Amanda covered this in week 1. In this picture here, that's Laura Davies in her usual tee, which is slamming her driver in the ground, creating a little divot and putting the ball up on that tee. The teeing area is a very sacred or special place that allows you to do certain things that you can't do otherwise. This is one of them. Smoothing sand in a bunker after playing from it. So take that very literal. So you have a ball in a bunker. You've played the ball out of that bunker. Even if it happens to be backwards, forwards, whatever the case may be, you can smooth that sand and touch it without restriction. Even if your next stroke would include going over that bunker or through the bunker, but you've played it out of the bunker. So it is on your line of play. This is one that you just take it for exactly how it's written. You've played out of the bunker. You're now completely out of it. You can smooth sand without any restriction. So that's one that took me a minute to wrap my head around, but take it very literally there. You can make certain improvements on the putting green. Another area that is very specific in what the rules are going to say you can and cannot do. Obviously, we can tap down spike marks now. We can repair ball marks. Again, on the putting green, we can remove sand and loose soil from the putting green and nowhere else. So another area that is one of our defined areas of the course. And there's some certain permissions that you can do on the putting green that you cannot do anywhere else. Moving a natural object to see if it's loose. That happens very rarely, but if it's loose, you can obviously remove it. If it's not, then it has to be put back to its normal state. Now we get into our prohibited actions. So got 2 categories of these prohibited actions. There's a couple that are fixable and then a couple that are not. So let's start on the right side and determine the items that are not fixable. So if you alter the surface of the ground, we're outside the teeing area here, not fixable, because it's just simply probably going to be impossible to restore it exactly how it was. Removing or pressing down sand or loose soil, again, cannot put that back in its exact spot. And then removing dew, frost, or water, again, all within those cats or those other areas covered by Rule 8. But then I'm going to the left side. So we do something that is a prohibited action and that does involve an improvement in Rule 8. But there's a couple things that within the rules that are going to allow us to kind of backtrack and fix those. So if you move, bend, or break any fixed or natural object, you can fix it by returning that exact object to that exact spot. So example of a boundary stake. So our ball is near an out of bounds stake, and we are not thinking or don't even know the rule, and we move that boundary stake. Well, that's not a movable obstruction, because in the definition, that's a fixed object, something that we cannot move, but we do it, and somebody says, hey, you can't do that. Well, now we could put that exact stake back into that same hole, into that same exact position. So now we've eliminated that improvement, and now we're going to avoid that penalty. But the key things are, it has to be that stake back in the same spot, in the same exact position and location. You can't use another stake if you happen to break it. You can't use anything artificial to fix it. Let's say for some reason the stake actually breaks in half. If it's dry rotted wooden stake, you can't tape it back together. There's none of that. It has to be putting that same object in the same condition back in the same spot. And then if you were to move a movable object into place, so that picture, we have a player standing on that bench. So in this case, that player had a ball in a tree. There's a bench nearby, actually moves it into position in order to stand on it and make that next stroke. Well, we know that now that we cannot do that. However, if that player were to move the bench out of the way before making that stroke, there would be no penalty, and the player would just have to determine what action to take, whether take an unplayable or try to play it without the bench there. So another kind of nuance here. So it says to move a movable object into place. So if that bench just happened to be there, the player did not move anything. So the player then could climb on that bench and make that stroke because he did not physically move that bench into position. So in that case, just gets lucky in that situation. So how you may fix, so covered this when trying to explain those things, but just to recap, you have to have the original object back into the original position and eliminate any improvement that was made. And then if you happen to move an object into place, you have to remove that object again to eliminate any improvement there. Any questions on Rule 8?
Yes, I have one here that says, if instead of a divot, it's your own pitch mark and you want to putt the ball, can you fix the mark? So obviously, if your ball is on the putting green, you're allowed to mark it and fix your own pitch mark, and then go back, replace your ball, and then proceed with putting. If you want to putt the ball, but the ball is off the putting green and it's laying in the fringe in the general area, then and the divot is in that fringe, then you're not allowed to fix your own pitch mark unless obviously the ball is embedded in that pitch mark. Then you would proceed under the embedded ball rule that Kent covered last week.
Perfect, thank you. And just to, so we covered 8.1 there. There's two others, 8.2 and 8.3. 8.2, I touched on a little bit, which are, deliberate actions to alter other physical conditions. So anything that you couldn't do in 8.1 with involving your cats, so that specific stroke, you cannot do in other areas where the ball might come to rest. So the rules aren't going to allow you to, create an advantage with an area that your ball might come to rest. 8.3, once we know the first two, we can't do anything in 8.1 or 8.2 to somebody else's ball. So we can't alter or try to improve or do anything to affect somebody else's cats for their next stroke or where their ball might come to rest. So if you want to read more on that, once you get 8.1 down, then 8.2 and 3 make a whole lot more sense, and they're pretty straightforward. So next, we're going to cover Rule 9, another one that, whether you know it or not, you use for every stroke that you make in one way or the other. But before we get into Rule 9, we need to define what actually means whether or not a ball has moved. Another one of these definitions in the rules of golf that do not match Webster's version necessarily, because we can have a ball that does physically move or oscillates or kind of wobbles in the wind or something like that, but per the rules of golf, it has not moved in their version of that definition. So it actually has to leave its original spot and come to rest on another spot. They did add the naked eye clause here, so we cannot use any HD high-speed videography to determine. So if it can be seen by the naked eye and the other two boxes are checked, so it's left at its original spot and comes to rest on another spot, it has moved. So it says it can be seen by the naked eye. It doesn't mean that it has to be seen by the naked eye. So the rules aren't going to let you close your eyes and start moving things around and say, hey, I didn't see it, so it never happened. So you have to take that into account as well. So the next part of that, it applies whether the ball has gone up, down, horizontally. So we have a ball perched on some grass. So it's in the rough, it's our lucky day. You do have to take some careful measures not to, if you ground your club lightly, that's permitted. However, if that causes your ball to sink downward in that rough, now you have caused the ball to move. You're going to get one penalty stroke and have to put that back. I know Kent covered virtually known or virtual certainty and covering penalty areas. This is another time where it's used to determine what the standard is as to whether the ball moved or not. So this could be something that we saw or we thought we saw. It can be something that we didn't see. So you have a blind tee shot or a putting green, and we see a dog run across the green, we have to determine, did that dog cause our ball to move? Again, we have to use that 95% standard to determine. This can be used by use all the information gathered by spectators, whoever's around to determine that. But you have to have a 95% standard as to whether or not the ball actually moved or not. So another time that the known or virtual certainty statement or definition is used here. So now we have determined that the ball has moved. So the rules of golf are going to break this down into 4 possible causes. So we know the ball has moved. Now we have to determine what actually caused it to move, whether or not we're going to put the ball back, whether or not somebody's going to get a penalty. And all that is going to determine be determined based on this slide and determining who or what actually moved that ball. So natural forces, wind, water, forces of gravity. So just kind of nature out there that just things happen, and that can happen to cause our ball to move. The player, which would include the player's caddy, or the partner or the partner's caddy. So I'm not sure if we talked about sides or not. So if we have a side in golf, the side includes a player. If you have a caddy, it includes your caddy. When you involve partners, so we're playing a 4-ball or foursomes, our side also includes my partner and my partner's caddy. So that's all included in our side. The opponent or the opponent's caddy, so the opponent's side, and then an outside influence. So it could be basically another way of saying, anything. So another player in stroke play, an animal, a spectator, or just anything else. So something else that are not included in those first 3. Now, what do we do for all of these? This is a summary slide. Again, there's in all of these rules that we're covering, we're trying to, put these in layman's terms and keep things as succinct as possible. But natural forces, so the things mentioned before, wind, gravity, no penalty, and play the ball as it lies, with 2 exceptions. So the exceptions aren't here, but I'll go over those real quick because one of them is a new added exception in the most recent version of the rules. The first one has been around though. So you have a ball on the putting green and it's just lying there, has not been marked, and wind blows and the ball rolls away. So that's a natural force. It's caused our ball to move. There's no penalty, obviously, and we're going to play the ball from its new spot. However, if we hit a ball on the putting green, we go up and mark that ball and pick it up. Now we have kind of moved into this exception. When we put the ball back, if wind blows the ball and it rolls away, this exception says that we are, no matter what, now that we've marked and lifted that ball, we are going to play from that spot. So if you have a ball that's on a hill and that hill is going away from the hole and it's a windy day, the best thing to do is run up there and mark that ball because you're going to play from that spot or one close to it if it won't come to rest. But you want to go ahead and do that as quick as possible. Now, on the flip side, if that hill is sloping towards the hole, you want to give it as much time as possible without delaying play, because if the wind blows and the ball rolls towards the hole, we haven't done anything else to affect that ball, and it rolls near the hole or even in the hole. Now it's our lucky day, and we've used that rule to our advantage, and you accept that outcome. So again, you cannot delay play. You can't do anything to influence the ball. It has to fall under this natural forces in number 1 here. But that's a way that you can use the rule to your advantage. Next, we have the player. And if we, as a player, move our ball, we are going to accept 1 penalty stroke and replace the ball on its original spot. Now, there are 5 exceptions, which we will highlight here because there's 5 of them, and these are kind of the most likely because it just involves the player. So our exceptions here are that you are allowed to lift or move the ball. Now, there's tons of times when we're allowed to do it, such as on the putting green, we are allowed to mark and move our ball. You can do it at any time your ball's on the putting green. Accidental movement in trying to find or identify the ball. We've covered that already in Rule 7. Accidental movement on the putting green. Putting green is a special place. You have special permissions and allowances there. So if it's by accident and you move the ball that's at rest, then you're simply just going to put it back, and no penalty there. If you're trying to apply a rule, this is our fourth exception. So we have a ball on the cart path, and we're trying to determine our nearest point of complete relief, or we're trying to measure our club length. And we are in the middle of applying that rule. That's another time you see while. So there is a start and an end point. The rules are going to say that if we're trying to apply that rule and we're in that while time period, there's no penalty for that. And then if the ball moves after coming to rest against player or against a player or equipment, this does not happen very often. But let's just say you have a ball that you've made a stroke and happen to come back, and again, this is all kind of accidental, nothing deliberate. It comes to rest against your foot or your club, and then you trying to remove yourself or the club, the ball moves. This falls under our exception where we're not going to get a penalty. And in any case, if it's by accident, and we're going to replace that ball and move on. Next, an outside influence. Next, an opponent. So if our opponent moves our ball at rest, they are going to receive one penalty stroke. And either way, we must replace the ball on the original spot. There are three exceptions here. So the times that it wouldn't, these exceptions would not be included. So we have an opponent that accidentally kicks our ball in the fairway, or some other case like that. They are going to receive one penalty stroke, and either because they are the ones that moved it, or ourselves as a player replace that ball. But there are three exceptions. So the first one, we're in match play. When you see the word opponent, we know we're in match play. So there are special rules there. If you are conceding the stroke, you obviously can pick up the ball and toss it back to the player. Also, if you are trying to mark and lift the ball on the putting green and you just happen to mistake it as your own, but it's really your opponent's, that falls under our exception, and we are not going to get penalized for that. It kind of falls under the same umbrella as accidental movement on the putting green. So if it's by accident, we just happen to mistake that ball for our ball, the rules are not going to penalize you there. And then thirdly, the same exceptions as for the player. So there's a few exceptions that we covered for the player that would apply for the opponent as well. Specifically, it mentions 2, 3, 4, or 5. So it's just to go back here. So if it's the opponent's looking for our ball, so doing us a courtesy and moves our ball, obviously the rules are not going to penalize for that. Accidental movement on the putting green, same thing as mistakenly mark that ball, and then trying to apply the rule for themselves, not going to get penalized. And then the fifth one as well. So pretty self-explanatory. In Rule 9, you just have to first determine whether or not the ball has moved. Apply that virtual certainty standard, and then once we determine that it has, we further break it down into what caused it to move, and then determine if there's going to be a penalty, whether to our opponent or to ourselves, or if we're going to play the ball as it lies with natural forces, or if someone else or something else moved it, then we're going to put it back. So hopefully that helped kind of summarize that rule for everybody. But we will take some questions now if there are any, Amanda.
Yeah, I have one here. I think it kind of relates back to what we talked about in Rule 8, asking when during a play of a hole can a damaged cup be repaired? So it also kind of goes outside a little bit. That specifically falls under Rule 13, but a player is allowed to repair a damaged cup, whether or not their ball is on the putting green, and they just they're only allowed to repair it to get it back to as near as possible as its original condition, but they're not allowed to repair it if it's anything like natural wear to the hole, something. But if it's from a ball embedded in the side of the cup, the player has the right to fix that cup as close back to the original position as possible.
Excellent. Any other questions?
Nope, that's all we have right now.
All right, well, we're going to jump into our last rule, which is Rule 11, which we typically in the office and in rules workshops, even in our own education, Rule 11 can be somewhat confusing. So we are going to try to summarize it as best as we can, because there's just so many different situations and outcomes. And did this happen? Did that happen? Was the ball on the putting green? Was it off? So we're going to try to summarize that as best we can. So it's 3 parts. 11.1, paraphrasing here, but accidents happen, and for the most part, there's not going to be any penalty, and we're going to replace the ball, but or play the ball as it lies, sorry, but depending on whether the ball's on or off the putting green, there's some times where we are going to have to cancel and replay. 11.2, deliberately putting things in the way. So we've positioned someone or something in the way to purposely deflect our ball if it comes to it. 11.2 does not happen very often at all. 11.3, deliberately taking things out of the way. This is one that it is rare, but it's more likely, in my opinion, than 11.2. You might just have someone or yourself just not thinking and just take something out of the way that is not permitted by the rules. So we're going to try to summarize each of these sections in the next few slides here. So 11.1, a lot of words on here, just we'll kind of tiptoe our way through it. So again, accidents happen. So we're only talking about accidental deflections of a ball that is in motion. So the place where the ball must be played and whether or not there's going to be a penalty. So first, if the ball is played from off the putting green, so anywhere except the putting green, there's going to be no penalty, and we're going to play the ball as it lies. As with many rules, there are exceptions. So if the ball does come to rest, so we got a ball in motion, it's been deflected, but then it actually comes to rest on any person or thing, we're going to drop the ball if it was off the putting green, if it came to rest on that object off the putting green in a relief area. This actually has happened in one of our tournaments. There was a golf course where a road was actually in play. A Jeep, I believe, actually drove down the road. Player struck a ball. It hopped into the Jeep, and of course the Jeep carried on down the road. So we're obviously not going to have to track down that Jeep and play the ball as it lies. In that case, we're going to determine where the ball was at rest in that Jeep where it first came to rest, and then we're going to drop the ball under that spot using our 1 club length relief area in that same area of the course, no closer to the hole. If it happened to happen when the ball was on the putting green, so let's say a dog picked it up. We've got a picture there of a nice beagle there. If we have a ball in motion, it's been played from off the putting green onto the putting green, it's still rolling, the dog runs up and snatches that ball, we're just going to simply place the ball where the dog first picked that ball up. So a couple exceptions there. So all of those that I just talked about were if the ball was played from off the putting green. Now, if we have played a ball from on the putting green, there's going to be no penalty, with an exception that I'll cover here at the end. And whether or not we play it as it lies or cancel and replay determines what actually caused that ball to be deflected. So you're going to play the ball as it lies if it strikes an animal defined as a loose impediment. So worms, ants, etc. I'm not going to be able to cancel and replay. That's going to be play the ball as it lies. A loose impediment, obviously, play it as it lies. The next couple might be surprising if it, again, this is all accidental. So nothing deliberate here. It's all an accident. If the ball strikes the player or the club used to make the stroke, that is no penalty, and play the ball as it lies. Or in case if it's hold, that's could be your lucky day. But again, we're not talking about anything deliberate. This is totally by accident. The flag stick or the flag stick attendant by accident, or of course a ball marker, which of all of those, the ball marker, a loose impediment, an insect might be the most common, but we're just going to play the ball as it lies if it's played from on the putting green and happens to be deflected by one of those. Now, on the left side, our cancel and replay situations are if it strikes another person, a movable obstruction, including another ball in motion, or an animal that's not defined as a loose impediment. So if we're on the putting green and that same dog runs up and picks up our ball again, now we're going to cancel and replay that stroke in that certain case. The exception that I mentioned in the first part is in stroke play. If you have your ball's on the green, you have another ball at rest on the putting green, so both balls were on the green before the stroke, the player would get the general penalty only in stroke play in that case if their ball hits that other ball that's at rest. So our next section, 11.2, so deliberately putting things in the way. Again, this does not happen. I can't from memory think of a time that this actually happened in an event that we've run in my time with the VSGA. So we've switched from accidents to deliberately. So we have intent. There's an intention to affect the outcome. The player would get a general penalty if they deliberately take an action to deflect any ball in motion. Doesn't matter if they're their own ball, an opponent, or another player in stroke play. So they actually have to either touch the ball that's in motion or hits any equipment or other object that the person put into position to deflect that ball. And in this case, there's two things that have to happen. The player must have intent, so it's not an accident. It's very deliberate, and the ball must actually hit the object in order for that player to receive the general penalty. So there are a few things that are in 11.2. So you have to have intent. You have to put something down or position something or someone with the intent that it will affect the outcome by deflection, and the ball must actually hit the object in order for there to be a penalty situation in 11.2. Now moving to where the ball must be played. So we've deliberately put something in the way. We've determined whether or not we're going to be penalized based on the outcome. So it's an intent and outcome-based rule. So if the ball was played from off the putting green, the ball is going to be played from where it most likely would have come to rest. So this is something that we have to take into account all factors where the ball would have likely come to rest. We're going to determine our one club length relief area in that correct area of the course and drop it in that area. If the ball would have come to rest out of bounds, so the ball's screaming towards a boundary, there's no way to stop it. There's no way it would have come back. You know, someone purposely deflects the ball. We're going to take stroke and distance in that case. If the ball is played from on the putting green and someone purposely deflects the ball that we just covered, you're going to cancel and replay that stroke. The next 11.3, this is one that, again, it is rare, but it's more likely than 11.2 in my opinion. So we have a ball that's in motion. Yeah, I'm harping on this a lot, but now we're talking about deliberate actions. So the player must not deliberately take any of the actions below. So alter the physical conditions that are covered in Rule 8 that we just covered a few moments ago, or if there's a loose impediment or a movable obstruction. You know, it's kind of that while moment, while the ball's in motion. So there is a beginning and an end. So if we know that in beginning, before that stroke is made, before that ball is in motion, we are allowed to move loose impediments or movable obstructions. But we're in that while period of time. So while the ball is in motion after a stroke, you can no longer move loose impediments or a movable obstruction. And in this case, in 11.3, the player or the opponent, the other player in stroke play must only have intent. So once you remove that divot, once you remove the loose impediment, remove the boundaries or the penalty area stake, something that you think would have impacted that ball while it's in motion, right away, that penalty is going to be applied. There's no way to get out of it because it's only an intent-based rule versus 11.2, you have to have the intent. So the deliberate putting something in either in front of the hole, behind the hole to deflect the ball, and the ball has to actually hit it. So two parts there. But 11.3, when you're taking things out of the way, once the ball is in motion, that is only an intent-based rule. So just want to really harp on that because it, at least for myself, it's confusing to wrap your head around the first time. There are a few exceptions, as always, for where the player would not receive a penalty. So this rule, so we have a ball that's in motion already, removing a remove flag stick. So the ball's on the putting green, and we put the flag stick behind the hole, and maybe that person did not put the flag stick far enough away from the hole because the player hit a bad putt. It's kind of screaming towards the hole. Everyone sees that it might hit the flag stick. Person runs over, picks up the flag stick out of the way. That is part of our exception. There's no penalty there. Ball at rest on the putting green. There'd be no penalty to anyone there as long as they followed the correct procedure in marking that ball and lifting it to remove it so it doesn't strike it, or the equipment belonging to any player. So same as the flag stick. We put our clubs down, our towel, whatever the case may be, somewhat near the hole and just wasn't quite far enough away. If we think the ball is tracking towards hitting those objects, then they are able to be removed out of the way without penalty. And any questions there on Rule 11?
Yeah, I've got one question here. It's a situational one that they had a kid once pick up the ball on the green and put it in the hole. They had no idea where it was originally on the green. How should they have played that? So if they know it has been moved by an outside influence and they're not sure where the original spot is, the player in that case must use their reasonable judgment to determine where the ball had come to rest before it was moved. So in that case, you know, the player would have to take their best reasonable guess where it may have landed on the green and place it there and continue on from there. There are no penalty strokes to the player in that situation.
All right. Anything else before we wrap up? Amanda, any other questions?
I got one more here that says, can I remove a yellow stake, which I think my ball may strike? And penalty stakes are movable obstructions, so that yellow stake would be able, you'd be able to pick it up, place it down, and then replace it after you make your stroke. Those are the only two questions we have, Josh.
Great. Well, again, to go back to the intro, we hope that you all enjoyed today's session as well as the other two sessions. This is our second year of doing this virtual series of workshops, and we would like any feedback, or if you have any questions, you can certainly submit those via email to us. So please, we're open, all ears to receive that. And the easiest way to do it in order for it to reach us is to go to our website, which actually we just launched a new website yesterday. If you go to the About Us tab at the top and then Contact Us, there's a rules section. You can email us another question, whether you have it now or throughout the season, any feedback. But again, we welcome that. And also, if you would like to attend a future session, whether it be this year or next, for this year's sessions that are coming up, we will be promoting those hopefully this week. It'll be a full day. We'll cover more rules, and we'll cover even some of the same rules that we did during these virtual sessions, a little more in depth, and be in person. So we hope to see you there. If we don't see you there, we hope to see you at an event one way or the other. I know we have a few volunteers. Look forward to seeing you all soon. We have a few players on there. Look forward to seeing you all in our events really soon. But I appreciate all the support for all these sessions, and hope you all have a good rest of your week, and look forward to the upcoming golf season. So thank you so much. If you do have a question now, we're going to hang out for just a minute or two and we can answer those, but we will see you all later. Thank you.